Picture this. You're living your ordinary life when suddenly God tells you to build a massive boat in your backyard. Gather 2 of every animal on Earth and prepare for the end of the world as you know it. Sounds impossible, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to a man named Noah thousands of years ago, and his story has captivated people for generations. Long, long ago, when the world was still young but had grown dark with wickedness, there lived a man named Noah. He wasn't a superhero or a king or anyone particularly famous. He was just a regular guy trying to live a good life in a world that had gone terribly wrong. But Noah was different from everyone else around him. While his neighbors lied, cheated, stole, and hurt each other without a second thought, Noah tried his best to do what was right. He was kind to his family, honest in his dealings, and he talked to God regularly, something that had become pretty unusual in those days. God had been watching the world he had created with growing sadness. The beautiful planet he had made, filled with amazing creatures and breathtaking landscapes, had become a place where violence ruled and kindness was rare. People had forgotten how to love each other. They had forgotten how to care for the animals and plants around them. They had even forgotten about God himself. Every day, things seemed to get worse instead of better. Murder, theft, cruelty, and selfishness had spread like a disease across the entire earth. But when God looked down and saw Noah, his heart was touched. Here was one man, just one, who still remembered what it meant to be good. Noah wasn't perfect, mind you, but he genuinely tried to live the right way. He loved his wife, he cared for his 3 sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and he treated everyone around him with respect, even when they didn't deserve it. Noah was like a tiny light shining in an ocean of darkness. One day, as Noah was going about his normal routine, something extraordinary happened. God spoke to him. Now, this wasn't like hearing a voice on the radio or having someone call your name from across the street. This was the creator of the universe communicating directly with Noah's heart and mind. The message was both simple and terrifying. God was going to destroy the world with a great flood because of all the evil that had spread across it. But here's where the story gets really interesting. God wasn't just telling Noah about the coming disaster to scare him. He had a plan, and Noah was going to be a crucial part of it. God wanted to save Noah and his family, along with representatives of all the animal species on Earth, so that life could begin fresh after the floodwaters receded. To do this, Noah would need to build something that had never been built before, an enormous boat called an ark. When God described the size of this ark, Noah must have felt his head spinning. It was to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. To put that in perspective, this thing would be bigger than a football field and taller than a 4-story building. It would have 3 decks, rooms throughout, and a window near the top. The whole thing was to be made of cypress wood and covered inside and out with pitch to make it waterproof. This wasn't just a boat. It was going to be a floating city designed to house thousands and thousands of animals plus Noah's family for over a year. Imagine being Noah at that moment. Here he was, probably living nowhere near a large body of water, being told to build the biggest boat anyone had ever seen. His neighbors must have thought he had completely lost his mind. Picture trying to explain to your wife that you need to quit your day job to spend the next several decades building a massive ship in the backyard because God told you a flood was coming. Sounds crazy, but Noah believed God and got to work. Building the ark wasn't something that happened overnight. This was a construction project that likely took Noah and his family many, many years to complete. Every single day, Noah had to wake up and make the choice to keep building, even when his back ached from all the heavy lifting, even when his neighbors mocked him, even when the sky was perfectly clear and there wasn't a rain cloud in sight. He had to cut down enormous trees, shape massive beams, and figure out how to construct something that had never existed before. There were no instruction manuals, no YouTube tutorials, no hardware stores where he could buy supplies. Everything had to be done by hand with simple tools. But Noah didn't just have to build the ark. He also had to prepare for its passengers. God had given him specific instructions about which animals to bring aboard. For most species, he needed to bring 1 pair, a male and a female, so they could reproduce after the flood. But for certain animals that were considered clean and could be used for food and sacrifices, he needed to bring 7 pairs. This meant Noah had to become something like the world's first zookeeper. figuring out how to capture, house, and feed an incredible variety of creatures. Think about the logistics involved here. Noah needed to gather elephants and mice, lions and lambs, eagles and earthworms. He needed animals from hot climates and cold climates, animals that ate meat and animals that ate plants, animals that were gentle and animals that were dangerous. How do you convince a lion to walk peacefully alongside a zebra onto your boat? How do you keep a polar bear comfortable next to a camel? How do you store enough food to feed thousands of different species for over a year? These were the kinds of impossible problems Noah had to solve. As Noah worked year after year on his massive project, the world around him continued to grow more wicked and violent. People probably gathered around his construction site to laugh and point. They must have called him Crazy Noah, or the old fool who thinks it's going to rain. Some might have thrown things at him or tried to sabotage his work. Others probably just shook their heads sadly, thinking that Noah had lost touch with reality. After all, many of these people had never seen a flood, let alone one that could cover the entire earth. The idea probably seemed completely ridiculous to them. But Noah kept building, kept gathering animals, kept preparing. His wife stood by him, even though this crazy project had turned their entire life upside down. His 3 sons and their wives helped with the construction and animal care, even though they were probably embarrassed by what their neighbors thought of their family. Day after day, month after month, year after year, the work continued. Finally, after what must have felt like a lifetime of preparation, the ark was complete. This massive wooden ship sat there on dry ground, loaded with thousands of animals and supplies for Noah's family. It must have been an incredible sight. This huge boat sitting in the middle of land, filled with the sounds of roaring, chirping, bellowing, and chattering from every kind of creature imaginable. The smell alone must have been overwhelming. Then God spoke to Noah again. It was time. The flood was about to begin, and everyone needed to get on board. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 wives walked up the ramp into the ark. 8 people total. 8 human beings who would be responsible for starting the human race all over again after the floodwaters disappeared. Once everyone was safely inside, something amazing happened. God himself closed the door of the ark. This wasn't Noah or one of his family members shutting them in. This was the creator of the universe personally sealing the door. At that moment, everyone inside the ark was completely in God's hands. They couldn't change their minds and leave. They couldn't let anyone else in, even if they wanted to. Their fate and the fate of all the animals with them was entirely up to God now. For 7 days after God shut the door, nothing happened. Can you imagine what that week must have been like for Noah's family? They were locked inside this enormous boat, surrounded by thousands of animals, wondering if maybe they had made a terrible mistake. Outside, their neighbors were probably having a great time making fun of them. Look at Crazy Noah and his family, locked up in their big boat when there isn't even a cloud in the sky. Maybe Noah himself started to wonder if he had really heard God correctly. But on the 7th day, everything changed. It started to rain. Not just a regular rain, but the most intense downpour anyone had ever seen. At the same time, the Bible tells us that the fountains of the great deep burst forth. This probably means that underground springs and water sources erupted all over the earth, adding to the massive amount of water falling from the sky. The flood wasn't just rain. It was like the earth itself was splitting open and releasing all the water that had been stored inside it. At first, the people outside the ark probably weren't too worried. They had seen rain before. They could build shelters, climb to higher ground, wait it out. But this rain didn't stop. Hour after hour, day after day, the water kept falling and rising. What started as puddles became streams. Streams became rivers. Rivers became rushing torrents that swept away everything in their path. As the water level rose, people must have started to panic. They climbed onto the roofs of their houses, but the water kept rising. They ran to hills and mountains, but the water followed them there too. Some probably tried to swim to the ark and begged Noah to let them in, but it was too late. God had sealed the door, and only God could open it. The water rose higher and higher until it covered even the tallest mountains. Every living thing that breathed air and lived on land died in the flood, except for those safe inside the ark. The earth that had been filled with violence and wickedness was washed clean, but at a terrible cost. An entire world of people, along with all the land animals and birds not on the ark, perished in the floodwaters. Inside the ark, Noah and his family experienced something no human beings had ever experienced before or since. They were floating on an ocean that covered the entire planet. There was no land anywhere, just water stretching endlessly in every direction. They couldn't see the sun clearly through the constant storm. They had no idea where they were or where they were going. The ark wasn't like a modern ship with engines and steering. It was more like a giant floating box that went wherever the wind and waves pushed it. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain continued to fall. But even after the rain stopped, the water stayed high. Noah and his family floated on this worldwide ocean for months and months. They had to feed the animals twice a day, clean up after them, care for any that got sick, and try to keep themselves sane in what must have been incredibly difficult conditions. The noise alone would have been overwhelming, with thousands of different animals living in close quarters. The smells, the work, the stress of not knowing what was happening outside their floating home must have been almost unbearable at times. But Noah trusted God. Even when it seemed like they would float forever, even when he wondered if they would ever see dry land again, Noah held on to his faith that God had a plan and would take care of them. After 150 days, the water finally started to go down. Slowly, very slowly, the highest mountain peaks began to appear above the surface. The ark eventually came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. But even then, Noah and his family had to wait. Just because the ark had stopped moving didn't mean it was safe to get out. The ground was still covered with water and probably very muddy and unstable. Noah decided to test whether it was safe to leave the ark by sending out birds. First, he sent out a raven, which flew back and forth but didn't return to the ark. Then he sent out a dove. The first time, the dove came back because it couldn't find anywhere to land. A week later, Noah sent the dove out again, and this time it returned with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. This was wonderful news. It meant that plants were starting to grow again and the water was low enough that trees were no longer completely underwater. When Noah sent the dove out a third time, it didn't come back at all, which meant it had found a good place to live outside the ark. Finally, more than a year after they had first entered the ark, God told Noah it was time to come out. When God opened the door that he had sealed so long ago, Noah and his family stepped out into a completely different world. Everything they had ever known was gone. Every person they had ever met, except for their own family, was dead. Every house, every town, every familiar landmark had been washed away. They were like the first people on earth, starting completely over. The first thing Noah did when he got out of the ark was build an altar and offer sacrifices to God to thank him for keeping them safe. God was pleased with Noah's gratitude and made a promise that has affected every person who has lived since then. God promised that he would never again destroy the earth with a flood. As a sign of this promise, God put the very first rainbow in the sky. Noah and his family then began the enormous task of repopulating the earth. The animals spread out across the land, finding new homes and having babies. Noah's 3 sons and their wives had children, and those children had more children. Slowly, gradually, the earth was filled with life again. This story of Noah's Ark has been told and retold for thousands of years because it touches on some of the deepest truths about human nature and our relationship with God. It shows us that actions have consequences, that God cares about how we treat each other, and that even in the darkest times, there can be hope for a new beginning. Noah's story reminds us that one person who chooses to do what's right can make a difference, even when it seems like the whole world has gone wrong. Whether you see this as a literal historical account or as a powerful story with deep meaning, the tale of Noah's Ark continues to inspire people to think about what really matters in life and what kind of world they want to help create.